Bennett. Democracy takes time. We heard in the select committee process from not one but many submitters that democracy takes time. And this legislation, as we have heard, as we have seen, as we continue to see, just runs roughshod over our democracy. It does so many disservices to not only our democracy but to our environment, to our obligations and our responsibilities to Te Tiriti, to our engagement with local communities, right through, Mr. Speaker, through to actually the court processes. And we've heard already this afternoon in this debate about zombie projects, about projects that have been rejected, that suddenly, magically, who knows how, end up in Schedule 2 of the fast track bill. Now, more than 27,000 people submitted on this piece of legislation, and not all of them had the opportunity to speak in select committee to their submissions, which is, again, a shame and a challenge to our democracy. But I want to quote from one of our submitters who made a very poignant statement around our democracy and the importance of it. To ensure that as we move through this House, through different laws and legislations, that we do right by people and we do right by our democracy. Now, ngā rangahau tira, in their submission, they said democracy is not exercised once every 3 years. A healthy democratic society allows for the frequent exercise of democratic rights when decisions are being made that affect the public, particularly in their own communities. This bill erases those opportunities for democratic consultation. This bill erases those opportunities for democratic consultation. And Mr. Speaker, that's why this bill concerns me. Because it's not only running roughshod over lots of pieces of legislation and laws, but comes into the very heart of democracy itself. And who is affected most when there is a new road, where there is a new energy project, when there is a new coal mine? It is those people who are closest to it that are the most affected. I'm not sure why that's funny. We should laugh about the fact that those are affected, but they are. And in this piece of legislation, it's going to run roughshod over them. And that is the challenge. And in the previous fast-track legislation that the Honourable David Parker had, there were checks and balances in place. And the environment, of course, was part of the purpose. So that had to be taken in consideration. Now, I won't be able to quote every single Act of Parliament that is actually being ignored or run over the top of, but I can name a few for you this afternoon. We've got the Crown Minerals Act of 1991, we've got the Wildlife Act of 1953, we've got the Reserves Act of 1977, we've got the Exclusive Economic Zone and Continental Shelf Act of 2012, we've got the Fisheries Act of 1996, we've got the Resource Management Act of 1991, we've got the Conservation Act of 1987, we've got the Freshwater Fisheries Regulations of 1983, we've got the Heritage New Zealand Act of 2014, and, of course, the Public Works Act of 1981, and then there's the treaty itself. There's bits of it that it mentions in there, but it very much runs roughshod over that. And that is just some of the statutes that are just being run over the top of in this space. Mr. Speaker, I am concerned that not only it is about the challenge to our democracy, not only is it a challenge to our environment, but it is a challenge to Te Tiriti itself. And as a Te Tiriti partner, my responsibility is to stand up for the sake of my role and my responsibility as an ancestor who came here on the premise of what Te Tiriti offered to my people. And I continue on in another submission that was made, and they said, and I quote, by bypassing proper consultation processes and disregarding the protections guaranteed by Te Tiriti o Waitangi, it undermines the rights and interests of Māori and the conservation of sacred lands, including wahutapu and public conservation areas. Now that should alarm the House. The fact that a submitter has considered and looked, and we, as we talked in terms of the when we were in select committee and then through the committee of the whole House, the fact that this legislation, that this bill that potentially, I assume, unless those on the government side want to cross the floor with us this afternoon and vote it down, this legislation has a potential to run roughshod over our responsibilities to our democracy, to Te Tiriti, but also to sacred spaces, but also to our urupas, to our wahitapu sites, to all those kind of spaces. And it has. This is, Mr. Mooney, I have read the bill. I've been on the committee for the past 6 months, so I know it very well and know the fact that you do not need to, in terms of there's some responsibilities, but there's some mays. They may have to do this, may have to do that. Mr. Speaker, we cannot support this bill. We are concerned, but also want to raise again through our select committee process that we went through to another organisation in a submission, and that was from the Insurance Council of New Zealand. The Insurance Council of New Zealand, because they, in their written submission, made it very clear, and I quote, that it is paramount that the bill does not inadvertently provide a pathway for projects which expose communities to excessive financial and physical risks of natural hazards. And Mr. Speaker, this bill does. They go on to talk about decision makers should take a long-term view that supports the broad availability of insurance by avoiding new development in high-risk areas. And what does this bill do? What does some of those 149 projects do? They are definitely spaces where we probably should not be building new houses and new subdivisions. They go on and talk about, this is the Insurance Council of New Zealand, talk about the Auckland Anniversary Weekend weather event. They talk about Cyclone Gabriel and the challenge that they had 110,000 claims from those two events with an estimated cost of $3.75 billion. Now, the reason I bring up that number in their submission is because the events that they spoke to us about highlight that we must have a stronger focus on our land use, the development, and as we look at the climate change adaptation, the challenges that we're faced, we are going to be responsible for more and more of this kind of activity where properties are built in places that they should never be built in the first place. But this fast track bill allows for them not to consider some of those spaces and to move on and allow those terrible things to happen. Mr. Speaker, our world is burning and this government is just throwing more fuel on that fire. Whether it's this legislation, whether it's the Crown Minerals Bill and other legislation that they are trying to get through at pace, this is not good not only for us today, but for those into the future. And I want to reflect in terms of what this means when we talk about zombie projects that have been brought back to life in this bill. When we talk about projects that the courts have rejected for the environmental challenges, and my colleague and friend from Taranaki has also spoken about Trans-Tasman Resources and the challenge that there's a private company in this bill that all they're going to do is dig up and suck up all the sand off the bottom of our beautiful Taranaki ocean, and then the profits go over to Australia where the company's from, and they jeopardise the fact that offshore wind is a viability, is viable. But no, let's just throw them in the list. Let's just make sure that they're there so that they can, they've had their day in court, hasn't gone well, and now we just throw this zombie project back on the list. And to me, it's just despicable and terrible. And as has been said, there's renewable energy projects in this bill, but Mr. Speaker, it is just smoke and mirrors. It is just smoke and mirrors in terms of what they are wanting to achieve. In closing, I want to be reminded of the 30,000+ people that walked down Queen Street back in June, who walked to protest against this bill and what it was going to do for the sake of nature, for the sake of our climate, for the sake of democracy. Mr. Speaker, we don't want to be fossil fools on this side of the House. We want a fast track not like the trash that they talk about on this side of the house. Nature doesn't need a speeding ticket. And Mr. Speaker, the final, I would like to say, of one of those billboards on that march was "Make Aotearoa Green Again."